8 victims in 3 years, all taken from the same darkened road. And for 40 years, these murders were a total mystery, until one piece of evidence blew the case wide open. These are the Colonial Parkway murders. Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder. All things that I love to consume, and I know you do too, you sick, twisted, beautiful, intellectually minded freak. I brought the second camera back, okay? A lot of you guys, I asked you guys a few videos ago if you wanted me to bring the second camera back, and it was overwhelmingly yes! That is why I watch you. Half of you were like, that is the only reason I watch you. So we're back. We're back with the second camera, all right? And if you don't like it, too bad. This is what we're doing right now, all right? I try not to use it too much to not, like, make it seem jarring, but it's there if I just want to like leave the video for a minute and just talk to you guys. It's just a little break from reality. All right. So, but continue to tell me what you guys like and what you guys don't like. I always read the comments, but I digress. Anyway, today we are getting into an extremely interesting case that I knew nothing about a week ago, and now I'm about to educate you on it. So without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 on the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through this windshield into this crazy case together. Let's take a moment to talk about something that's very uncomfortable, and that's scam calls. Have you ever gotten a scam call where they said your name, knew your city, maybe even mentioned a family member? That's not a coincidence, and that's really freaky. But there are hundreds of data broker companies quietly buying and selling your personal information right now. Your home address, your phone number, your relatives' names, and you never agreed to any of it. But Incogni fixes that because they contact data brokers on your behalf, request your removal, and handle all the pushback for you. And with their new custom removals feature on the unlimited plan, you can literally point to any website where your personal info is visible, a people search site, anywhere, and their privacy agents take it down for you. It's a serious extra layer of protection. So go to incogni.com/KallMeKris and use code KallMeKris for 60% off an annual plan. It's so incredibly important to protect your information. I highly recommend you use Incogni, so go check it out today. And I'll leave the link and code in the description for you, because they can't harm you if they can't find you. Thank you to Incogni for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel, and let's get back to it. The Colonial Parkway is a 23-mile stretch through the heart of Virginia's historic triangle, and it connects Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown all along a winding road between the York River and the James River. Built between 1931 and 1957, the Parkway was designed to be a meticulously crafted landscape, allowing visitors to experience nearly 400 years of American colonial history without any commercial advertising. And there are no gas stations along the length, no restaurants, no billboards. And the pavement itself is made of rounded river gravel that's set into concrete, giving the road an earth tone color with no painted lane markings. And several million people venture down this path, drawn by its natural beauty and historical significance. And during the day, it's a beautiful drive with forests on both sides of the road, and the York River appears through the gaps in the trees. But at night, it becomes something else entirely. There are no street lights to be found, and long stretches pass through dense woods where the towering trees block even the moonlight. And more than 50 pull-offs and overlooks can be found throughout. And in daylight, families use them to stretch their legs and take pictures. But after dark, these same spots become completely isolated, invisible from the main road. And National Park Service rangers are responsible for patrolling that route, but jurisdiction is complicated. And rangers handle traffic violations and have sole authority over certain sections. In James City, Williamsburg, and York County Police have jurisdiction within their respective limits, except in areas belonging to the Park Service. So state police can patrol most of the parkway, again, except for where the rangers have exclusive authority, and this is important. So put it all together and you're left with a bunch of overlapping responsibilities that leave potential gaps in coverage. And a local to the area, Bill Thomas, described the situation bluntly. Quote, Some longtime law enforcement people have said to me that it was like the Wild West out there at night because it was only patrolled every few hours. So people knew you could go there and basically be left alone, especially at night, unquote. And nearby young couples figured this out quickly. And while most unmarried people still lived with their parents, making privacy hard to find, the Colonial Parkway offered a solution. As one author noted, quote, "As soon as the sun set, these isolated dark corners became a popular place for young couples to park their cars and hook up," unquote. And during the 1980s, the parkway was known specifically as Gay Lovers Lane. And according to former homicide detective Steve Spingola, author of Predators on the Parkway, quote, "It was known not only by the homosexual community, but by the haters of the homosexual community," unquote. So the parkway has an eerie dual nature that people who live nearby seem to understand naturally. And true crime author Blaine Pardoe, who would later co-author A Special Kind of Evil, The Colonial Parkway Serial Killings, observed, quote, "Having done the research for the book, I've since found that it's a creepy place to go to at night. It's lost its romance. There are alternative routes," unquote. And that reputation would prove well earned. So the surrounding Virginia Peninsula was heavily influenced by military and college towns in the mid-1980s, and Hampton Roads was, and still is, one of the most significant military spots in the United States, and the area supported a number of major bases. Naval Station Norfolk, the world's largest naval base, and Langley Air Force Base, Fort Monroe, Fort Eustis, the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, the oldest Navy shipyard in the country. So these bases brought in a steady stream of service members and their families to the area, creating a moving population where unfamiliar faces rarely drew attention. And alongside the military presence, the peninsula is home to a large student population. And the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, founded in 1693, is the second oldest institution of higher education in the United States. And Christopher Newport College, though it wouldn't gain university status until 1992, is an anchor for the academic community. So young people were just everywhere, and the late-night culture was vibrant. But what didn't exist was any way to call for help, because this was before everyone had cell phones. And once a couple pulled off the main road and into one of the parkway's secluded areas, they were completely cut off from any means of communication. So if something went wrong, there was no one to call, and no way to reach them either. And former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell later explained, quote, "Couples go to Lover's Lane because it's isolated. They're usually in a dark area. They're secluded, especially when they're there to engage fully with one another. All those things could feed the fantasy of a serial killer," unquote. So the combination of minimal patrols, complete isolation, multiple secluded pull-offs, no lighting, and a population of young people from nearby military bases and colleges created a swirl of conditions that would prove disastrous. Now, the parkway's darkness was perfectly suited for someone to take advantage of those who were unprepared. So Kathleen, or Kathy Marianne Thomas, was 17 years old in October of 1986, and her brother, Bill, would later describe her as stereotypically Irish in her physical features, pale skin, blue eyes, bright red hair, with a sweet and innocent look. And she had always been extremely smart and socially conscious, even from a young age. She was articulate and funny, with what he called a quick Irish wit. And Kathy had already accomplished more than most people twice her age. And in high school, she was an excellent athlete. She was a forward on the basketball team and competed in track and field. And she was just a natural leader. And when one friend from high school learned about Kathy wanting to go to the Naval Academy during their senior year, she immediately thought it was so Kathy because not only was it exceptional, it was groundbreaking. And even though that was an unusual thing for a woman at the time, that same friend recalled just how well-liked Kathy was. She was friends with nearly everyone, and in the classroom, she excelled. And she was a great writer with a natural aptitude for learning new languages even. So from 1977 to 1981, Kathy attended the United States Naval Academy as part of only the second class in the institution's history to admit women. And the Thomas family became the first father, son, and daughter trio to graduate from the academy. And while there, she played basketball and ran cross country. And she would graduate and become an ensign in the U.S. Navy. And she even studied to become fluent in Russian at the height of the Cold War and was awarded Most Improved Russian Student at graduation. And she would be assigned to duty in Norfolk, Virginia, where she served aboard the L.Y. Spear as a logistics officer in charge of cranes and the movement of torpedoes. And she was one of the first women to become surface warfare officer qualified and earned a number of outstanding fitness reports. And several sailors said she was the best officer they ever served under. So just an extremely accomplished woman. But Kathy eventually would leave the Navy due to their general hostility towards homosexuals. As her brother would later describe, quote, "She had been very sorry to leave the Navy after 5 years, but she didn't feel that it was welcoming for her as a gay woman," unquote. So she would jump into a new career as a stockbroker. And it would be around this time that she would meet Rebecca, or Becky, Ann Dowski. Now, Becky Dowski was 21 years old, originally from Poughkeepsie, New York. And she majored in business management at the College of William and Mary, where she was in her senior year. Now, Becky held 2 jobs while pursuing her studies, and one at a daycare center looking after young children, and another as a clerk in the college's English department. And she would be described as a very talented musician and college student with a very promising future. And she was also creative, kind, and just loved music. So Kathy and Becky would start dating in the spring of 1986, which was not something easily discussed in the mid-1980s, because people's attitudes towards same-sex relationships at this time made openness hard, especially for someone with Kathy's military background. So the two kept their relationship private, seeking out places where they could spend time together without fear of judgment. And the Colonial Parkway was one of those places. So on the evening of October 9th, 1986, Becky was seen leaving the computer lab on the William and Mary campus sometime around 6:30 in the evening, because she and Kathy had made plans to be together later that night. But after that, they would vanish, and their families would grow more and more worried as attempts to reach them failed, and no one would have any idea what had happened to them for 3 days. So on October 12th, 1986, a jogger spotted a white 1980 Honda Civic somewhere between 5:30 and 5:45 a.m., and the car would sit at the bottom of an embankment at the Cheatham Annex Overlook, and the location was about 7 miles east of Williamsburg. And the vehicle had gone off the road into thick brush, and it came to rest just a few feet from the 15-foot drop into the York River. So a state trooper responded and found both women inside, and both had been killed. Now, Kathy's body had been shoved into the rear hatchback area, and Becky was found in the back seat. And from what the ranger could see, both women looked to have been strangled with a rope, and also their throats had been cut. And evidence suggested Kathy had actually tried to fight back, because a clump of hair was found gripped between her fingers, and a piece of nautical line was tangled in her hair. And the killer had also doused the car's interior with diesel fuel, but the fire was never lit. And whether this was intentional or a failed attempt remains unclear, but several details pointed toward a methodical killer. And the driver's seat had been adjusted for someone much taller than Kathy, which possibly indicated the killer had driven the vehicle after taking control. But no blood was found in the surrounding area, and the murders likely occurred somewhere else before the bodies were transported. And both women remained fully dressed, so there was no indication of any SA. And their purses were also still inside the car with money and jewelry untouched, so robbery did not appear to be the motive. Investigators collected more than 100 fingerprints from inside and outside the Honda, though none matched anyone in law enforcement databases at the time. So they had no leads, and the case started to go cold. Then there was David Lee Nobling, who was 20 years old, and he lived in Hampton, Virginia, where he did landscaping and sales work, and his girlfriend had recently found out she was actually expecting a child. But David would meet another girl at that time named Robin Margaret Edwards, who was just 14 years old. And she would be described as fearless and just full of energy. But she had reportedly run away from home a number of times before, and according to one source, her experiences had left her aged beyond her years. But it was around this time where she actually seemed to start turning things around for herself. So on September 19th, 1987, David offered to drive his younger cousin, Jason, to see Robin for a date. So Jason was actually going out on a date with Robin that night. And the plan was to see the movie Dragnet, and David's brother Michael came along as well. However, when they arrived, the movie was sold out, so the group went to an arcade instead. And at around 10 p.m. that night, they brought Robin back to her parents' house in Newport News. And Robin's mother, Bonnie Dodson, remembered their last conversation. Quote, "I told her that she had to be home by 11, and she called me about a quarter after 11 and let me know that she was home safe," unquote. But Robin did not stay home, and she actually slipped out later that night to meet up with David again, this time alone. And together, they drove to Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge. And that area sits about 30 miles from the Colonial Parkway along the James River. And like the Parkway overlooks, it was a secluded location. But unfortunately, neither of them would ever be seen alive again. So 2 days later, on September 21st, a sheriff's deputy patrolling Ragged Island found David's Ford Ranger pickup. And the truck appeared abandoned, and the doors were closed but not locked. And the window on the driver's side was rolled down, and the radio was still on. But there was no sign of David or Robin anywhere. And 2 days after that, on September 23rd, a person walking the shoreline discovered their bodies, because both had washed up with the tide about 100 feet apart from each other on the beach. And Robin looked to have been shot once in the back of the head, and evidence indicated she actually had been because she had been found with her clothing partially removed and her jeans were unbuttoned. And her bra had been pushed up around her neck. And David would be found shot twice, once in the shoulder and once in the head. And the shoulder wound suggested he may have attempted to flee, and he likely turned away from his attacker before being struck. And in a stroke of unfortunate timing, a heavy rainstorm had passed through the area on the night they died. So investigators found that most of the evidence found at the scene had already been washed away. So again, any tangible evidence at this time was lacking, and there were no suspects. So Richard Keith Kall was 20 years old and studying computer science at Christopher Newport College. And his sister Joyce would describe him as someone who really enjoyed life a lot and was just fun to be around. He was passionate about computers, and he even had a Commodore 64 set up in his bedroom. And at this time, Keith was on a temporary break from his girlfriend, and they had been together for close to 4 years, but he had just asked for a couple of weeks apart to sort through his feelings. And it would be during this break that he would meet Cassandra Lee Haley. Now, Cassandra was 18 years old and had just begun her freshman year at Christopher Newport College. And she stood about 5'7" with an athletic build. And she had competed as a gymnast in high school and taught gymnastics to younger students. And her mother, Joanne Haley, later would describe her as very warm and had openness, saying Sandy was unique. There was nobody she wasn't going to be a friend to. She was very generous with everything, unquote. But Cassandra had a fear of water, and she had also expressed unease about the Colonial Parkway. And after the murders of Kathy Thomas and Becky Dowski 2 years earlier, she thought the place felt unsettling. But April 9th, 1988 would be the day of their first date, and by most accounts, this was just meant to be casual. So that evening, Keith picked Cassandra up from her family's home in Grafton, Virginia, and he was driving his red 1982 Toyota Celica. And they would first go to see a movie, and then they would head to a party near campus in the University Square area. And at the party, witnesses noticed they spent time apart. And Keith talked with his own friends, and Cassandra caught up with an ex-boyfriend, actually. It was a very relaxed, fun evening with nothing unusual. And after they had enjoyed themselves, they left the party together sometime between 11:30 p.m. and 2:25 a.m., so very big gap of time. And despite Cassandra's discomfort with the Colonial Parkway, that's where they ended up going anyway. So the next morning, April 10th, Keith's red car was spotted at the York River Overlook in Yorktown, and it was found around 7 a.m., but not reported until 9 a.m. And this location was only a few miles from where Thomas and Dowski had been discovered 18 months earlier. And the driver's door was hanging open, and Keith's keys sat on the seat, and his watch and glasses had been placed on the dashboard, so the arrangement seemed deliberate. And inside the back seat, investigators found most of Keith's clothing and nearly everything he had worn that night, including his underwear. And some of Cassandra's clothing was there too, along with her underwear. And empty beer cans were scattered throughout the back seat as well. And both Cassandra's purse and Keith's wallet were gone this time. And true crime author Blaine Pardoe later observed a pattern across the cases, saying, quote, "It's almost like a fingerprint to each one of the Colonial Parkway cases. The keys were left in the car, the door was left ajar, the radio was on. They were all set up so someone would see that car and steal the car and muddy the case even more," unquote. But tracking dogs were brought in to search, because at this point, neither of them were anywhere to be found. But the dogs would pick up a scent leading away from the vehicle, and the trail ran along the parkway past the spot where Thomas and Dowski's car had been found. And it ended at Indian Field Creek, where the dogs tried to go into the water, and handlers had to hold them back. And the behavior suggested a boat may have been involved. So park officials initially theorized that Keith and Cassandra had just gone swimming and potentially drowned. But investigators were doubtful that that was the case, because the water temperature that time of year was around 40 degrees, which is cold as fuck. And a 20-foot embankment separated the overlook from the river. And, as mentioned before, Cassandra was known to be afraid of water. But unfortunately, an extensive search of the river turned up no sign of them. And with no bodies, they really had nothing to go on, so the case would go cold. And next, there was Anna Maria Phelps, who was 18 years old. And her family said she had such a great sense of humor, just very sharp and very witty. And she had been living in Virginia Beach with her boyfriend, Clint Lauer. But the couple was struggling to make ends meet, because Clint had recently been let go from his job at Wendy's, and their electricity had even recently been disconnected. But Daniel Lauer, who was 21 years old and Clint's brother, and from Amelia County, Virginia, said that he would move in with them to help with payments. And those who knew Daniel described him as being exceptionally generous, saying he was, quote, "the kind of guy who refused paychecks from his father's painting business," unquote. So Daniel had agreed to move in with Clint and Anna Maria to help cover their expenses, and he also wanted to spend Labor Day weekend with them in Virginia Beach, but he needed to return back to his parents' home in Amelia County to gather his belongings and officially move in. And Anna Maria decided to go with her boyfriend's brother, Daniel, so she could visit her own family back in Amelia County. So by all accounts, it should have been an uneventful trip, but it wasn't. So on the evening of September 4th, 1989, Daniel and Anna Maria left her parents' house heading east on Interstate 64 toward Virginia Beach. And Daniel drove his gold 1972 Chevrolet Nova, and he had cash on him from recent work he had done for his father's painting company. And the trip should have taken about an hour, but they would never arrive. And witnesses later reported seeing them at a rest area at the eastbound side of I-64 in New Kent County. But what happened after remains unclear. So the next day, Daniel's Nova was found abandoned at the rest stop on I-64 in New Kent County. But something was wrong. The car was on the westbound side of the highway, which was odd because they had been traveling east toward Virginia Beach. So someone had turned them around, and the car sat at an odd angle on the merge ramp, and the driver's window was halfway down with both doors unlocked, and the keys remained in the ignition. But a small detail inside the car caught investigators' attention, because Daniel had a feathered roach clip that he normally kept hanging from his rear view mirror, but it had been moved to the driver's side window. So the repositioning appeared to be very deliberate, and some investigators saw it as a taunt from whomever had taken them. And dirt and grass were caked underneath the vehicle, which made it look like the car had been driven off-road recently. And Daniel would have had no reason to leave the highway. And Anna Maria's purse was still inside, once again ruling out robbery. So at first, investigators speculated that Daniel and Anna Maria had simply run off together, and for 6 weeks, neither was found. But finally, on October 19th, 1989, hunters walking along a logging road made a discovery less than a mile from the rest stop. And the discovery was skeletal remains in that wooded area covered by an electric blanket. And the blanket had come from Daniel's car. But decomposition had destroyed most of the physical evidence, which unfortunately made it so the exact cause of death could not be determined. And whether Anna Maria had been SA was also impossible to establish. But one finding stood out. Stab wounds were visible on Anna Maria's bones, because she had a cut mark on one of her finger bones, suggesting she had fought back against her attacker. So whatever happened in those woods, she did not give up without a struggle. But years later, investigators would discover a note Anna Maria had written, and it had been sitting in a box of evidence from her apartment, overlooked during the original investigation. And the note described plans to meet someone at a rest stop, and it included a name and mentioned the person would be driving a blue van. And how this detail connects to what happened has never been explained. And by September of 1989, at least 8 young people had been killed or disappeared along or near the Colonial Parkway over a span of just 3 years. But at this point, the person responsible remained free. Let's take a pause to talk about something that has saved my mornings, and that is Remy. Because for years, I'd wake up with a sore jaw from nightly clenching. I have a horrible clenching problem. But I even see like little chips forming in my teeth, and I knew I needed to protect my smile. And that's why I trust Remy to protect my teeth with their custom night guard, along with over 350,000 Americans. And Remy night guards are clinically tested and FDA cleared to prevent teeth damage from grinding, reduce jaw tension and facial muscle strain, and help improve sleep quality. I also get horrible migraines. I have chronic migraines, and my clenching actually makes them worse. And I have found that Remy has helped that quite a bit. But you get the same professional quality and comfort as a dentist-made guard for about 80% less by taking your own impression at home. But here's how my personal Remy experience went. The impression kit arrived at my door. The instructions were really easy to follow, and I'm not good at that. I made my impressions in minutes, and Remy crafted a custom fit night guard and shipped it back fast. And putting it in felt comfortable and secure, and now I sleep better and my teeth are protected. So protect your teeth with Remy using code CCCM for 50% off. Shop remi.com/CCCM. That's 50% off with the code CCCM. Thank you so much to Remy for supporting the channel and sponsoring the video, and let's get back to it. So the FBI did not wait long to share their theory with the Thomas family. And 4 days after Kathy and Becky's bodies were discovered, agents approached Bill Thomas, and they believed the killer might be someone in law enforcement, or possibly someone impersonating law enforcement. And when Bill asked them to clarify, the agents explained they were looking at police officers, park rangers, or someone presenting themselves as an authority figure. And the theory came from what investigators observed at the crime scene. The windows of Kathy's Honda had been rolled down, and her wallet had been pulled from her purse. So it looked like she had been preparing to show identification. And retired FBI specialist Agent Irvin Wells later pointed to those rolled down windows. And they suggested the victims believed they were dealing with someone who had authority over them. And former FBI profiler Jim Clement reached a similar conclusion. And wallets were found open in the victim's vehicle across multiple cases. Quote, "That tells me that either they were getting ready because they thought they were being pulled over by a police officer or park ranger, or whoever approached them pretended to be a cop or was a cop," unquote. But criminal profiler Pat Brown interpreted it slightly differently, and she believed the perpetrator, quote, "could be involved in law enforcement or more likely wished he were. And this was someone who, quote, wanted authority and probably did not have it," she said. And quote, "His crimes gave him this feeling. He was able to surprise, control, and punish wrongdoers," unquote. So the theory explains something that had puzzled investigators. How could one person control 2 victims at once? And why was there no evidence of a struggle in most cases? And why, other than David, did nobody try to flee? Because if the victims thought they were dealing with a cop, then compliance made sense, and they would stay calm and just follow instructions, and they would have no reason to suspect danger until it was already too late. But a theory is, of course, not a suspect. And for nearly 2 years, the FBI had a profile but no one to attach it to. But that changed in the spring of 1988. So shortly after Keith, Kall, and Cassandra Haley vanished on April 10th, a suspect surfaced, and he was a waterman, and he made his living harvesting oysters and clams from the rivers and creeks of the Virginia Tidewater, because he knew those waterways intimately, and he had built his own boat, and he also drove a truck that people remembered, and it was a blue 1966 Dodge pickup truck with oversized tires, with a rifle rack in the rear window. And the vanity plates read E.M. Raw, short for Eat 'em Raw, which I know he does oysters, but I don't like that at all. And witnesses had come forward with stories about this man, because he wasn't content to watch from a distance. He had been approaching couples parked in the pull-offs along the parkway, and he walked up to the vehicles and he knocked on the windows and he made contact. And people who encountered him described him as bolder than the typical peeping Tom. In fact, one incident in particular stood out, and a couple was parked in their car when someone knocked on the glass, and the man outside peered in and asked, quote unquote, "Are you girls having fun?" Oh God, creepy. And when he realized one of them was actually a young man with long hair, he backed off and left. And FBI profilers had been building a picture of the killer based on events from the crime scenes. The piece of nautical rope that was found in Kathy Thomas's hair. The killer had used diesel fuel in an attempt to burn the evidence, and diesel was far more common in boats than in cars. And the knife wounds on the victims suggested someone comfortable with a blade, perhaps someone who processed fish and shellfish for a living. And tracking dogs had followed victims' scents to the water's edge in multiple cases. So the FBI started watching their fisherman suspect almost immediately, and what they saw was concerning, because he was repainting the bed of his pickup truck, vacuuming the interior carefully. So to the agents watching it, it looked like someone eliminating traces of what his vehicle might have been used for. So investigators would obviously be worried evidence was disappearing, so they would move quickly to obtain a search warrant, and they executed it at the trailer where the man lived. And inside, they found items that fit their developing profile: handcuffs, a gun, and pornography. An FBI agent, Joe Wolfinger, later described the search, saying, quote, "They got everything. We got his vacuum cleaner, and they did a search of his truck, and they found a gun, handcuffs, and I can't remember what else," unquote. But nothing directly tied him to Keith and Cassandra. No blood, no belongings, nothing that placed him at the scene of their disappearance. But then the suspect said something, because under questioning, he admitted he had been parked at a pull-off near the Colonial Parkway around the time the couple went missing. And Wolfinger confirmed this, saying, quote, "He even admitted being at the next cutoff around the right time, so he was seen by somebody else that night," unquote. And with that, the circumstantial case started to build. And they had a suspect who matched the profile. And he had behavior consistent with destroying evidence, like restraints and a weapon in his home. And his own admission that he was nearby when Keith and Cassandra vanished. And today, this combination might have been enough to pursue charges, or at least to keep the pressure on while forensic testing continued. But this was 1988, and DNA analysis was not yet standard, and the fingerprints from the crime scene had not matched anyone in existing databases. And since Keith and Cassandra hadn't been found, there were no bodies to examine. So the FBI decided on one more step. They would administer a polygraph test. So the Bureau brought in one of their very best, because the examiner had a reputation. He was known as a polygrapher extraordinaire, and his name was Barry. And he had worked major cases, including the John Walker spy investigation, and John was a Navy communications specialist that ran an 18-year spy ring and passed sensitive info to the Soviet Union. So a serious guy, to say the least. So when Barry rendered a verdict, people trusted it, and the fisherman sat for the test. But surprisingly, he passed effortlessly. And based on the results, the FBI removed him from suspicion and released him. He simply walked out and went back to his life. An FBI special agent in charge, Irvin Wells, was furious, and he told author Blaine Pardoe what he had said to the polygraph team, saying, quote, "I know this guy did it. You guys better be right," unquote. But Wells deferred to the examiner, quote, "We brought in a polygrapher, one of the best the Bureau had. And he said this guy didn't do it," unquote. And at this point, it was the spring of 1988. And by then, the suspect had already killed David Nobling, and Robin Edwards the previous September, and he had killed Kathy Thomas and Becky Dowski a year and a half before that. And then 5 months later, Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lawyer became the next victims. But the fisherman was not the only suspect that surfaced, and over the following decades, more than 130 people drew investigative attention, and more than 3,500 reports were generated. And the case files swelled with tips and theories and dead ends. But one name that emerged was Fred Atwell. Now, he was a former deputy in Gloucester County. And Atwell would be eventually arrested, but not for murder. He had actually run a fraudulent car raffle that targeted families of the Parkway victims, which is awful and disgusting. Just exploiting their grief for money. And the scheme brought investigators to his door, but nothing connected him directly to the killings. So they hit another dead end. But then another name persisted, and that was Daryl David Rice. Now, Rice had been charged in connection with the 1996 murders of Julie Williams and Loli Winans in Shenandoah National Park. And the two women had been killed in a remote outdoor location, and the case had some similarities to the Parkway murders on the surface. A couple targeted in an isolated area, possible selection based on sexual orientation. So investigators explored whether Rice might be responsible for both murders for years. And finally, in 2024, DNA testing would eliminate him. And the actual killer in the Shenandoah case was identified as Walter Leo Jackson. Now, Jackson had no known connection to the Colonial Parkway, and Rice was tragically hit by a car while riding his bike and died just 15 days after being exonerated. So despite every other lead, the investigation kept circling back to the waterman with the blue truck. But officially, as we know, he had been cleared, so they were back at a dead end. So the Colonial Parkway investigation had faced a number of problems from the start. Jurisdiction was a mess, as we kind of discussed at the beginning of this video. And the parkway itself fell under National Park Service Authority, which meant there could be FBI involvement. But the Nobling and Edwards murders happened at Ragged Island, which was Isle of Wight County territory, and the Phelps and Lawyer case occurred at a rest stop in New Kent County. And Virginia State Police were involved across all the cases. And each agency had its own protocols, and information didn't always flow freely between them. And the technology of the time offered little help, as we know, because as mentioned, DNA testing was not standard practice yet. And even though fingerprints were plentiful, over 100 were lifted from just the Thomas and Dowski crime scene alone, there were no databases to match them against. So they sat in evidence storage, effectively useless without a comparison. And some of the crime scenes had been compromised, as we know, because at the York River Overlook, where Keith's car was found, park rangers reportedly disturbed evidence before investigators arrived, causing the original state of the scene to be lost. And the killer's methods created additional confusion, because Thomas and Dowski were strangled with their throats cut, and Nobling and Edwards were shot, and Phelps and Lawyer showed signs of stabbing. So if one person truly was responsible, why did their approach keep changing? That was odd. Usually these killers had the same MO across the board. And some investigators questioned whether the cases were even connected because of that. And furthermore, two of the cases left almost nothing to work with, because Keith and Cassandra's bodies were not found, and Anna Maria and Daniel were not discovered until 6 weeks later. And by then, decomposition had destroyed most of the physical evidence. So the families remained in this just dreadful limbo with no answers and no closure. So by the early 1990s, the Colonial Parkway investigation had completely stalled, and the last confirmed victims, Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lawyer, had been found in October of 1989, and investigators had continued working leads in the months that followed, interviewing potential witnesses and reviewing evidence, but nothing broke open, and the steady stream of tips slowly trickled out. And then it would dry up entirely, and the case went cold, but that did not mean it was forgotten. Because every few years, a new detective would pull the files and take another look, and journalists revisited the story on anniversaries, publishing retrospectives that briefly rekindled public attention. And true crime writers reached out to families, promising fresh perspectives in books that never produced breakthroughs. None of it really led anywhere. But Bill Thomas refused to let his sister's case disappear. And he would stay in contact with investigators, following up on every single lead. And he kept Kathy's name in front of anyone who might listen. And he wasn't alone, because other families did the same, attending press conferences and talking to reporters, refusing to let the victims become footnotes. But time kept passing, and the 1990s ended and the 2000s came and went. 3 decades would slip by. Children who weren't even born yet when Kathy and Becky died had now graduated from college. New students filled the dorms at William and Mary and Christopher Newport, and most of them blissfully unaware of what happened on the parkway their parents once warned them about. But the overlooks remained, still isolated and still dark after sunset. And somewhere in Virginia, the killer just kept living his life. But on December 15th, 2017, a delivery driver in Lancaster County, Virginia, noticed something wrong. A front door stood open at a rural residence, and the sign suggested a home that had been abandoned, or perhaps someone who could no longer care for themselves. And the driver reported what he saw, and police conducted a welfare check. And inside the home, they found a 63-year-old man, and he was dead, and the medical examiner ruled the death by natural causes. Atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, aka plaque buildup that had stopped blood flow to his heart. And based on the condition of the body, he had likely been dead for at least a month before anyone found him, and he had died alone. So as part of routine procedure, the medical examiner collected a DNA sample, and this was standard practice in cases requiring identification or documentation. And the sample was then preserved and filed. But no one had any idea of its significance at the time, because the man had no felony convictions, and his DNA had never been entered into any law enforcement databases. But he had been investigated 3 decades earlier when FBI surveilled, searched, questioned, and polygraphed him. But he had never been arrested or charged or required to provide a sample. So this routine collection at his death would eventually become the most important piece of evidence in a case that had gone unsolved for more than 30 years. But that realization was years away yet. So in December 2017, he was simply another body discovered during a welfare check, a brief report, a standard autopsy, nothing more. And the families of the Colonial Parkway victims didn't know the man investigators had long suspected was now dead. And they also didn't know he had walked out of the FBI interview room in 1988 and lived freely for nearly 3 decades. But now, the key to the truth was sitting in a medical examiner's file, just waiting for science and determination to catch up with a killer who had escaped justice his entire life. So in 2022, the FBI and Virginia State Police made a decision that would reshape the entire investigation. The Colonial Parkway murders had been cold for more than 30 years at this point, and traditional methods had been all but exhausted. And witnesses died or disappeared, and memories had faded with all that time passed. And the physical evidence that remained was sitting in storage lockers untouched by modern forensic science, since it had been collected before DNA testing was really even a thing. So, investigators decided to go back to the beginning, and they would re-examine every piece of preserved evidence using technology that had not existed in 1986. And this was no small task, because more than 130 people were investigated over those years, and files accumulated, and names were added and removed, and some suspects had died, and others moved away or vanished from investigative radar entirely. But DNA, of course, does not fade with time, and evidence properly stored can reveal its secrets decades after a crime. And among the samples submitted for comparison was one collected in December of 2017, the one taken from a 63-year-old man found dead in his Lancaster County home. And that man was the waterman who had been the FBI's primary suspect in 1988. The one who had passed a polygraph and walked free. And for 35 years, the polygraph result had protected him. Despite every piece of circumstantial evidence, despite the instincts of veteran investigators, the Bureau had let him go. Just let him go, based off a polygraph test. And now, science would deliver the final verdict. And in 2023, the Virginia Department of Forensic Science confirmed what investigators had long believed. The DNA conclusively matched, and the testing was performed by DNA Labs International in Florida, and funding came through the Virginia Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, which was a program created to address the backlog of untested evidence in sexual assault cases across the state. The same initiative that had brought closure to survivors of sexual violence was now delivering answers to families who had waited nearly 40 years. And the Waterman's genetic profile matched evidence records from the crime scenes, and it left no room for doubt. So the man who had sat in the FBI interview room in 1988 and convinced a polygraph examiner of his innocence had been guilty the entire time. And his name was Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., and he had been the FBI's top suspect from the moment they'd identified him in April 1988. Everything about him aligned with the profile investigators had constructed, from the nautical line, the diesel fuel, the blade work, etc., all pointing to a pattern of a predator who knew the parkway's isolated overlooks and used that knowledge to hunt. And that single test derailed the whole investigation, and it gave him a second chance at life, which he milked for 29 more years, free from suspicion, prosecution, and consequence. And then he died in his bed of November of 2017, and he was never forced to answer for what he had done to those innocent people between 1986 and 1989. And the DNA confirmation came 6 years after his death, nearly 40 years after his first murder. So justice, in any traditional sense, was no longer possible. Let's take a quick pause to talk about something we have all said at some point in our lives, and that is, I have nothing to wear. When in fact, you do have something to wear. But maybe you've just grown tired of the things in your closet. We've all been there. And that is why I've been genuinely obsessed with today's sponsor, Daily Look. Now, Daily Look is the #1 highest rated premium personal styling service for women. And what makes it different is that you get a real dedicated personal stylist, not a quiz that just spits stuff out. An actual human who curates a box of up to 12 pieces specifically for you based on your shape, preferences, and lifestyle. And you keep the same stylist every time, so they actually learn what you like, which is what I really like about it. And you can try everything at home and keep what you love and return what you don't. And it has free shipping both ways, with sizes extra small to 3X. And it's brands you actually recognize, like Kate Spade, AG Jeans, Girlfriend, Collective. So it's time to get your own personal stylist with Daily Look. So head to dailylook.com to take your style quiz and use code CCCM for 50% off your first order. Once again, that's dailylook.com for 50% off, and make sure you use promo code CCCM so they know I sent you. I've had so much fun using Daily Look, and I know you will too. Thank you so much to Daily Look for sponsoring the video and supporting the channel, and let's get back to it. But the confirmation of Wilmer's identity came in stages as investigators methodically linked his DNA to one crime scene after another. And in January of 2024, the FBI announced that Wilmer had been connected to the murders of David Knobling and Robin Edwards, the 20-year-old landscaper and the 14-year-old found on the shores of Ragged Island in September of 1987. Yet the same announcement revealed something unexpected. Wilmer had also been linked to Teresa Lynn Howell, a victim who had never been associated with the Colonial Parkway investigation. Now, Howell died in July 1989, 2 months before Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lawyer vanished. So it turns out the scope of Wilmer's crimes was larger than anyone had realized. And in November of 2025, investigators announced another connection. Wilmer's DNA matched evidence from the murder of Lori Ann Powell. And she had been killed in March 1988, just 1 month before Keith Call and Cassandra Haley disappeared. And like Howell, her case had been investigated separately for decades. And then, in January 2026, the FBI made the announcement the families had been waiting nearly 40 years to hear. Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. was responsible for the murders of Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski, the first known victims. The case that had started everything. The circle was finally closed. For the families who had spent decades searching for answers, the confirmation brought a complicated kind of relief. Bill Thomas had pursued his sister's case for a significant portion of his life. And when the announcement came, he spoke publicly saying, quote, "I've been pursuing answers for 39 years. Unquote. And even after all that, even after everything he had learned about the investigation, the confirmation just caught him off guard, saying, quote, "I was still surprised it was Wilmer," unquote. And the surprise made sense because Bill had known about Wilmer for years and knew he had been a suspect. And he even knew about the polygraph test. But suspicion and proof are different things. And after 39 years of uncertainty, the finality of DNA evidence still hit harder than expected. And the families of David Knobling and Robin Edwards expressed relief at finally having answers, saying, quote, "Now we have a sense of relief and justice," unquote. But the word justice carried a bitter undertone because Wilmer was dead, which meant that no courtroom would ever hold him accountable. But knowing who had taken their loved ones provided something that had seemed impossible for so long. And Wilmer's own family released a statement saying, quote, "The Wilmer family continues to be deeply impacted by the revelations of Alan W. Wilmer Sr.'s previous crimes. Learning that another crime has been connected to him is devastating," unquote. And the statement just acknowledged the horror of what their relative had done and recognized the suffering of the victims' families. It just captured the impossible position a killer's family occupies, connected by blood to someone whose actions they could have never predicted or prevented. But as of January 2026, DNA evidence has definitively linked Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. to 6 victims. Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski were the first to pass. They were killed in October 1986, and David Knobling and Robin Edwards were killed in September of 1987, and their case was the first officially connected to Wilmer when DNA results were announced in January 2024. And the investigation also tied Wilmer to the 2 victims who had never been part of the original Colonial Parkway case, Lori Ann Powell, who was killed in March 1988, and Teresa Lynn Howell, who was killed in July 1989. So 6 people. 6 lives ended by the same man, and potentially more. But a pattern of violence that stretched across nearly 3 years and stayed hidden for nearly 40. But the DNA evidence is conclusive, but sadly, not every case has been resolved. Keith Kall and Cassandra Haley remained classified as endangered missing persons. Their disappearance in April of 1988 fits the pattern of Wilmer's other crimes, because they vanished from a Colonial Parkway overlook only a few miles from where Kathy Thomas and Becky Dowski had been found. And investigators have told the Kall and Haley families that Wilmer is believed responsible. And the circumstantial evidence is just overwhelming and points in his direction. And he was the FBI's primary suspect at the time. And agents spotted him near the parkway days after Keith and Cassandra had vanished. And his knowledge of the waterways explained how he could have moved victims without leaving any trace. But without bodies, there was no DNA test. And Keith and Cassandra have been missing for 37 years. And without physical evidence, investigators cannot make the same definitive determination they have made in the other cases. But the families know what happened, and investigators know what happened. But officially, the case remains open. And Anna Marie Phelps and Daniel Lawyer have also not been forensically connected to Wilmer. And their disappearance in September 1989 was the last in the series attributed to the Colonial Parkway killer. And their bodies were found 6 weeks later, covered by that blanket from Daniel's car. But unfortunately, the decomposition of the bodies had advanced too far to determine the cause of death with certainty. But testing still continues, but no official announcement has linked Wilmer to their murders. And even in death, Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. exists in a kind of legal limbo, because under current law, his DNA cannot be uploaded to CODIS. And CODIS, for anyone unaware, is the Combined DNA Index System, or the national database that allows law enforcement agencies to compare genetic profiles from crime scene to known offenders. An entry into the system requires a criminal conviction, which is crazy to think about. I mean, he's killed people. He died, but put him into the system. That makes no sense. But since Wilmer was never convicted of anything, he was never charged of anything, and he died before the DNA match was made, and because he has no felony record, his profile cannot be entered into the system that might connect him to unsolved crimes in other jurisdictions. And CBS 6 legal analyst Todd Stone explained the limitation, quote, "The only way to address something like that really is through General Assembly. They'd have to change the law," unquote. Then change the law! What the f***? That makes no sense. You could give closure to God knows how many families, but we gotta change the law. What are we even talking about? It makes no sense to me. And the Virginia Attorney General's office has confirmed it cannot intervene, saying, quote, "The Attorney General's office doesn't have jurisdiction to intervene in an ongoing investigation," unquote, a spokesperson said. And Bill Thomas has taken up the fight to change the law, saying, quote, "Right now, the way the laws are set up, even though Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. is a serial killer and has killed at least 6 people, including my sister and her girlfriend Rebecca Dowski, we do not have the capability to upload his DNA into CODIS because he was never convicted of a crime before he died in 2017, unquote. And he and other family members are pushing for legislative reform. Quote, "We are going to be asking the legislature, the governor, and the new attorney general to change this law, because I can't believe we're protecting the civil rights of a dead serial killer over the rights of my family and all of these families who are still waiting for answers," unquote. But without the CODIS entry, investigators must work case by case. And every potential connection requires a direct comparison between Wilmer's DNA and evidence from that specific crime scene, which is a slow, incredibly painstaking process. And the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia has confirmed what the evidence makes clear. If Wilmer were alive, the evidence developed through this investigation would support federal prosecution. A moot point, considering he is, in fact, not alive. And Commonwealth's attorney in Isle of Wight County, the city of Hampton, and Gloucester County have all stated that charges would have been filed in their jurisdictions. But since he died before he was caught, he will never see the inside of a courtroom. And the DNA confirmation answered the question that haunted this case for nearly 40 years. The families now know who killed their loved ones, but other questions remain. Did Wilmer have an accomplice? Because the methods used in the murders varied dramatically in how they were killed, in how they were disposed of, etc. And the inconsistency of them all has puzzled investigators for decades. And Larry McCain led the Virginia State Police Behavioral Science Unit. And he argued that 2 people were working together. The level of control demonstrated over the victims, with multiple people subdued at once, no evidence of escape attempts, suggests more than one perpetrator. And Irvin Wells at the FBI shared similar suspicions. And Bill Thomas also supports this idea, saying, quote, "I'm fairly certain that he did not act alone," unquote. And author Blaine Pardoe raised a question investigators have not publicly answered. Quote, "So when they were in this DNA testing, did they come across anyone else's DNA profile on the victims that could be a potential accomplice with Wilmer? We just don't know that at this point," unquote. And the other question is, are there more victims? And the FBI has been direct about this, saying, "We are not finished. We are actively investigating other cases linked to the Colonial Parkway murders and remain committed to pursuing every lead for the families who are still waiting for answers," unquote. And Virginia State Police Captain Timothy Rabel confirmed the investigation's scope, saying, quote, "We are not ruling anything out when we examine other cases. Today's announcement also does not conclude our agency's investigative efforts to determine if Alan Wilmer Sr. was responsible for additional crimes," unquote. And investigators have urged anyone who knew Wilmer to come forward, saying, quote, "Even though Alan Wilmer Sr. is deceased, it is not too late to come forward," unquote. So the full extent of what Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. did during his years on the Virginia waterways may never be known. But hopefully we can get more answers in the near future. But that is it on the Colonial Parkway murders. It's a absolutely wild case. So many failures in this case. It's so sad to hear that he just got to live his life as a free man and then just die in the comfort of his own home. But hopefully he is burning somewhere out there in the ether of hell or whatever's going on, and hopefully the families of victims, not even in this whole particular story, hopefully they can find closure and investigators can work towards giving them that closure. But if you know anything, if you've heard this name or know anything about anything, make sure to contact Virginia State Police. But with that, please let me know if there are any other cases you want me to deep dive into. I always read the comments, and until next time, I will see your beautiful face. Stay safe out there, all right?